The smell of fresh bread and spicy herbs has always been the smell of home for me. 75 years is a long time to realize what is important in life. For me, the important thing has always been my restaurant, Bella Vita, which I created with my own hands in the distant 1977th year. The restaurant has become an extension of myself, my soul, my history, my heritage. But time passes. My hands are no longer the same. My back hurts more often, and since my Eleanor died 5 years ago, every day seems heavier than the last. That fall morning, I woke up with a clear realization. It was time to turn the restaurant over to my son. Maverick had turned 44, and who better to carry on the family business than him? I fiddled with an old photograph of little Maverick sitting in the kitchen of the restaurant, watching me roll out pasta dough with delight. There was so much genuine admiration in his eyes then. Where has it all gone? A phone call snapped me out of my reverie. "Ennis, have you changed your mind about this stupid idea yet?" The voice of Radley, my old friend and former restaurant chef, sounded concerned. "No, Radley, the decision's been made." I rubbed the scar on my left arm from a 40-year-old burn. This is my son, after all. Blood from blood. Your son hasn't shown up at the restaurant in the last 3 years unless you count family dinners on Sundays, Radley reminded me. And even then he spends more time staring at his phone than talking to you. I sighed. Radley was right, and we both knew it. Maybe this will change our relationship for the better, I muttered, not really believing my own words. Or give him what he'd always wanted without putting any effort into it, Radley countered. After talking to my friend, I decided to call my lawyer, Garland Myers, and make an appointment. Another hour later, I was already sitting in his office in downtown Lakewood. "Ennis, are you sure about your decision?" Garland asked, looking over the paperwork. "Your restaurant isn't just a business, it's a family legacy." "I'm 75, Garland. It's time to pass the baton," I replied, looking outside through his office window. Garland took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Did you at least talk to your son about the terms? Maybe you should retain some control?" "No. The transfer will be complete. I want him to feel full responsibility." Myers shook his head but remained silent. In the 20 years we'd known each other, he'd gotten a good look at my stubborn nature. That same day, when I returned to the restaurant, I saw an expensive black car parked at the entrance. Thackeray Snow was visiting again. This developer had been trying to buy my land for 3 years to build another shopping center. "Mr. Larkin!" He extended his hand to me as soon as I stepped through the door. "Good to see you. You look great." I shook his shiny hand, noting to myself that his suit was probably worth more than my entire closet. "Mr. Snow, to what do I owe this time?" "I hear you're thinking about retirement." He smiled his shark smile. "The offer to buy the land is still on the table. $2 million, Ennis. Think of what you could do with that kind of money." I sighed. It was an impressive sum, especially for a man of my age. "The land is not for sale, Mr. Snow. I'm turning the restaurant over to my son." His smile became strained. "Your son? The one who hasn't been here in months?" "Watch what you say," I warned, feeling my blood boil. "I'm sorry." He held up his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I just thought the offer might interest you. Here's my card if you change your mind." After he left, I stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the street where my children had once played. Now, Maverick lived in a big house on the other side of town, and my daughter Odella had moved to a neighboring state, appearing only on holidays or when she needed something. That evening, I packed a family dinner. Maverick was 40 minutes late, which was normal for him. His wife Victoria didn't even bother to show up, citing busyness. Odella flew in from Boston but spent the entire dinner checking her email. "So, I've gathered you here to announce an important decision," I began as dessert was served. "I've decided to turn the restaurant over to Maverick." Maverick looked away from the phone, his eyes lighting up with interest. The whole thing? With all the assets? Yes, completely, I confirmed, trying to ignore his greedy gaze. You'll be the sole owner. Odella put the phone away and frowned. What about my share? Why does everything go to him? Odella, I sighed. You always said you weren't interested in the restaurant business. You have a successful career in insurance. Yeah, but that doesn't mean I don't want my share of the inheritance. She raised her voice. That's not fair. Don't freak out, Maverick intervened. You've already gotten more than me. Your father paid for your education at an expensive university, and I went to a community college. That was 20 years ago, Odella exclaimed. Besides, you refused to go to another city to study. I looked at my children and didn't recognize them. Where were those sweet little kids who used to help me roll out pizza dough and listen to my stories with rapt attention? Now sitting in front of me were two grown men who couldn't wait to divide my inheritance. That's enough! I slapped my palm on the table. The decision has been made. Maverick gets the restaurant. Odella gets the house and all the savings. It's fair. After dinner, when the kids were gone, I sat in the empty restaurant for a long time, looking at the pictures on the wall. Here was the whole story of my life. The opening of the restaurant, the first customers, me and Eleonora, children, grandchildren. I remembered Maverick saying as a child that when he grew up, he would be the best chef in the world. But then came teenage rebellion, then college, marriage to Victoria, having children, a career as a food inspector. And each step took him farther away from the restaurant, from his family's traditions. The next morning, I got a call from Garland. Ennis, I've prepared all the paperwork for the transfer of the restaurant as you requested, but I have a proposition. What is it? I asked, trying to make coffee with trembling hands. That developer, Snow, is he still interested in your property? Yeah, he came by yesterday with another offer. I think we should draw up a preliminary agreement with him, just in case. Just in case of what? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Ennis, Garland's voice became serious. You and I have known each other for 20 years. I was your lawyer when you expanded the restaurant, when you fought the IRS, when you processed the paperwork after Eleanor died. I've seen how your children feel about you, especially Maverick. I was silent, not knowing what to say. It's just a safety net, Garland continued. A preliminary agreement with the developer that you can activate at any time, in case something goes wrong. I thought about his proposal for a long time. In my heart, I wanted to believe in the best. I wanted to believe in my son. But my mind told me that Garland might be right. All right, I finally agreed. Prepare this agreement, but I hope it never comes in handy. That same day, I called Maverick and told him that all the documents would be ready by the following week, and we could make the official transfer of the restaurant. He seemed excited and even thanked me, which was rare. On Sunday, Cassidy's granddaughter, Maverick's daughter, came to visit me. In her 30s, she was the only one in the family who was truly interested in my life. Cassidy worked as a school librarian and had inherited my love of Italian food. Grandpa, are you really going to give the restaurant to your father? She asked as she helped me prepare Sunday lunch. Yes, honey. It's about time, I replied, handing her the vegetables to chop. But you know he wants to completely change the concept, right? There was concern in her voice. He's been talking for a month now about some fancy culinary trends and how outdated Italian cuisine is. I froze, holding a wooden spoon. He told you that? Yes, at a family dinner when you were out. Cassidy looked at me guiltily. He and Mom are already discussing which designers to hire to update the interior. I set my spoon on the table and took a deep breath. So he'd already planned everything out without even waiting for the official handover. It hurt my pride, but I tried not to show it in front of my granddaughter. You know, Cassidy continued, tucking a stray strand behind her ear, I always thought that one day I could work here with you. Maybe even take over when you decided to retire. Why didn't you ever tell me that? I looked at her in surprise. Because I knew my father was counting on the restaurant, she shrugged. He always thought it was his by right. We finished cooking in silence, each immersed in our own thoughts. After lunch, when Cassidy left, I sat on the veranda of my house, looking up at the evening sky and thinking about the mistake I might be about to make. The next day, I met with Garland and Thackeray Snow. We signed a tentative agreement to sell the land under the restaurant for $2 million. The agreement was not enforceable until I signed the main contract, but it was ready to be activated at any time. "What are we going to do with this agreement?" I asked, looking at the document. "I'll make a copy and put it in an envelope," Garland replied. "If you need to activate the plan, just let me know, and I'll prepare the final agreement." "You see, Mr. Larkin," Snow interjected, "this agreement is only valid for a month. If you decide to activate our agreement, you'll need to do it within that time frame." "A month," I nodded. "Good, that's enough." In the evening, I called Radley again and asked him to stop by. My old friend showed up half an hour later with a bottle of good wine. "You look worried," he said, pouring the wine into glasses. "I signed a tentative agreement with Snow today to sell the land," I admitted. Radley looked at me in surprise. "You changed your mind about the restaurant?" "No, it's a backup plan. In case Maverick," I stammered, not wanting to say my concerns out loud. "If Maverick turns out to be the way we've known him for the last few years," Radley finished for me. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of shame and determination. Shame at not trusting my own son, and determination to protect what I'd spent a lifetime building. "You know," Radley said after a pause, "Eleanor told me a long time ago that the most important quality of a parent is the ability to let go. Maybe this is a good time to let go." "Letting go, yes," I agreed, "but not to let it be destroyed." We sat for a while longer, reminiscing about the old days when our children were young and we were full of energy and hope. I told him about the conversation I'd had with Cassidy, about how she dreamed of working in a restaurant. "Why don't you talk to Maverick about it?" Radley suggested it. "Maybe he'd be willing to take Cassidy on as a partner." I grinned bitterly. "You know Maverick. He won't let anyone near what he thinks is his." At the end of the week, I took inventory, collected all the bills, and prepared the restaurant for handover. Every corner of the place held memories. This was where Eleanor first tasted my tiramisu. This was where Maverick took his first steps. And this was the table where Odella received her husband-to-be's marriage proposal. Every crack in the wall, every scratch on the old bar counter, everything had a story. I pulled the old recipe book out of the safe, the tattered, yellowed pages written in my mother's small handwriting, then mine and Eleanor's. I didn't know what to do with it. Should I give it to Maverick, who would probably throw it away, keep it as a keepsake? Or maybe give it to Cassidy, the only one who truly valued our family traditions? After much deliberation, I decided to keep the recipe book, at least for now. If Maverick kept the concept of the restaurant, I could always give him the book later. The evening before the day of the handover, I couldn't sleep. All night I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about the decision I had made. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Mavericks will appreciate the legacy and preserve what I've spent a lifetime creating. Maybe passing on the restaurant would really bring us closer together. But deep down, I knew the truth. Maverick had long ago stopped appreciating what was important to me. He had become a man to whom status and money meant more than family values and traditions. I wanted to believe the best, but I prepared for the worst. In the morning, I rose with the first rays of the sun, feeling strangely calm. The decision had been made, the plan prepared. Now all that was left to do was wait and see how everything unfolded. In 3 days, I would turn the restaurant over to Maverick and see if I was right in my fears. I sipped a cup of strong coffee on the veranda, watching Lakewood wake up. This town had been my home for most of my life. It's where I met Eleanor. It's where my children were born. It's where I built my business and made my reputation. No matter what happens next, no one can take those memories away from me. A phone call interrupted my musings. It was Garland. Ennis, I prepared the envelope as we discussed. Will you come by today and pick it up? Yes, I'll be at your place in an hour, I answered, finishing my coffee. In Garland's office, I scrutinized the contents of the envelope. A copy of the preliminary agreement with Thackeray Snow, a brief explanatory note, and contact information of the developer. Everything okay? Garland asked, watching me. Yes, I nodded, closing the envelope. I hope this won't be necessary, but it's best to be prepared. You know, Ennis, Garland took off his glasses and looked me straight in the eye. I've seen a lot of family drama in my 20 years as a lawyer, and I have to say that your foresight is well worth it. I nodded silently, feeling bitter at his words. It was sad that my relationship with my son had reached a point where I needed a backup plan to protect myself from his actions. Back home, I stashed the envelope in my desk drawer and decided to spend the rest of the day doing the usual things. But my thoughts kept returning to the impending restaurant handover and what might follow. In the evening, Cassidy called and asked if she could stop by. Sure, honey, I replied, glad for the opportunity to get my mind off my heavy thoughts. Cassidy arrived with a bag of groceries and offered to make dinner. I've been wanting to try that lasagna recipe you showed me for a long time, she explained, pulling out the ingredients. We spent the evening in the kitchen, cooking and talking about all sorts of things. Cassidy talked about her work in the school library, the new books she was reading, and her plans for the future. Not once did she mention the restaurant or the upcoming show, and I was grateful for that. When dinner was ready, we sat down at the table and I opened a bottle of good wine. What shall we drink to? Cassidy asked, raising her glass. To the future, I answered after a short pause. Whatever unexpected twists and turns it might surprise us with. We ate dinner and Cassidy got ready to leave. At the door, she suddenly hugged me tighter than usual. I love you, Grandpa, she said quietly, no matter what happens. I watched her car disappear into the twilight and thought about how strange life was. Sometimes the closest people become strangers, and sometimes you find understanding where you least expect it. The next 2 days were spent preparing for the transfer of the restaurant. I gathered all the necessary documents, made final checks, talked to the staff. None of them knew about the upcoming changes, and I didn't say anything, leaving that up to Maverick. The evening before handover day, I walked around the restaurant one last time as owner. I touched every wall, every table, as if saying goodbye to an old friend. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, breathing in the familiar smells, and then I sat down at the corner table, the same table where Eleanor and I often sat after hours, discussing business and dreaming of the future. I've done my best, Ellie, I whispered, imagining her sitting across from me. Now it's his turn, and if he screws it up, well, I have a plan. The morning of the restaurant's handover day was unexpectedly sunny for late October. I got up early even though my sleep was already restless. My hands were shaking as I shaved, and the small cut on my chin wouldn't stop. A drop of blood on the white collar of my shirt seemed like a bad sign, but I wasn't one to believe in omens. The suit I chose was the same one I'd married Eleanor in, dark blue with a barely visible stripe. The tailor had made adjustments last month, but it still fit looser than before. I'd lost weight with age, or maybe I'd just shrunk like an old tree. Looking in the mirror, I realized that the suit would probably outlive me. The thought brought an unhappy smile to my face. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. A plain white envelope with a copy of the preliminary agreement to sell the land to the developer Thackeray Snow and a short note. I didn't know if I'd need it today, but I felt its presence, like an extra trump card up my sleeve. At 8:30, Radley picked me up. He insisted on accompanying me, even though I hadn't asked for it. "You look like you're going to a funeral," he said as I got into the car. Maybe I do, I replied quietly. A funeral for 45 years of my life's work. Don't be so dramatic, Radley moved out of the car. The restaurant would continue to exist, just under different management. I didn't bother to tell him about my concerns. About the fact that, according to Cassidy, Maverick was already planning a complete change of concept, that the very existence of the restaurant now depended on the conscience of a man in whom I had little faith. We arrived at the restaurant at 9 o'clock in the morning. Garland was already waiting for us in the parking lot, clutching a leather briefcase of documents to his chest. His face expressed professional calm, but I knew him well enough to notice the tension in the corners of his eyes. "Ready, Ennis?" he asked, shaking my hand. "Ready as I'll ever be," I answered, though my insides clenched with anticipation. We entered the restaurant through the back door. Giovanni, the chef, was already in the kitchen, preparing everything for tonight's opening. He nodded at me, and I noticed the question in his eyes. The staff had certainly guessed that something was going on, but I hadn't given them the exact details. "Where's Maverick?" I asked Garland, looking around the empty restaurant. "He promised to be here by 9:30, the lawyer answered, glancing at his watch. Maverick showed up at 9:45, 15 minutes late. He entered the restaurant with a cocky smile on his face, wearing an expensive suit and new cufflinks that caught my eye. They were coin-shaped, literally screaming his attitude toward money. "Dad! Garland! Radley!" He greeted each of us, but his handshake was fleeting, and his gaze was already roaming the room, as if assessing his new property. "Sorry I'm late, traffic." I knew it was a lie. Maverick was always late. It was his way of showing his superiority, of making it clear that his time was more valuable than other people's. "Shall we begin?" Garland suggested, laying out the papers on one of the tables. We sat down. Maverick across from me, Garland between us. Radley standing a little apart, crossing his arms over his chest and watching with undisguised wariness. "So, Ennis," Garland began in an official tone, "we have before us the documents on the transfer of the restaurant Bella Vita from you to your son, Maverick Larkin. The transfer is complete and unconditional, and includes all of the restaurant's property, equipment, furniture, dishes, inventory, as well as intangible assets, the name, logo, reputation." I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness inside. "Do you certify that you are acting voluntarily without compulsion and of sound mind and good judgment?" Garland continued. "I do." My voice sounded hoarse, and I coughed. "Maverick, do you confirm that you accept the restaurant with all assets and liabilities, and that you will honor your current contracts with vendors and employees until they expire?" "Yes, of course." Maverick tapped his fingers impatiently on the table. Garland slowly read out a few more clauses of the contract and then handed us the documents to sign. Maverick signed quickly, almost without looking. I read every line, even though I knew the documents by heart. Garland and I had discussed them several times. Finally, the last signature was made. Garland collected the documents, made copies for each of us, and announced, "Congratulations, Mr. Maverick Larkin. You are now the official owner of the Bella Vita restaurant." Maverick smiled broadly and clapped his hands. "Great," he turned to me. "Thank you, Dad. It's a big responsibility, and I appreciate your trust." His words sounded right, but there was something about the look in his eyes that made me wary. It was as if the mask of politeness was hard to keep on his face, ready to slip away at any moment. "I hope you keep what I've spent a lifetime building," I said, trying to catch his gaze. Sure. Maverick had already pulled out his phone and was typing something quickly. "Although, some changes are necessary. The restaurant business doesn't stand still." At that moment, the door of the restaurant opened and two men with tablets and tape measures entered. "Ah, here come the designers." Maverick stood up, greeting them. "Come in, I'll join you shortly." I looked at my son in surprise. Designers? You're already planning the renovation? Not just renovations, Dad. Maverick finally deigned to look at me. A complete overhaul. New concept, new interior, new menu. But Bella Vita has always been an Italian restaurant. I felt my heart start to beat faster. It's our family tradition, our history. Maverick rolled his eyes like he was talking to a child. Dad, Italian food is obsolete. Asian fusion is the trend now. High profit margins, low production costs, great marketing potential. What about our regulars? Those who have been coming here for years for Italian cuisine? They'll adapt or find another place. Maverick shrugged with such indifference that it hurt me. Business is business. I glanced at Garland, who was carefully pretending to sort through the paperwork, and at Radley, whose face had darkened with anger. What's going to happen to the staff? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Most of them will have to find new jobs, Maverick said in a business-like tone, as if he were talking about abstract units, not people who'd worked with me for decades. Giovanni can't cook Asian cuisine, so he'll definitely have to leave. Already found a young chef from San Francisco, very promising guy. Giovanni looked out of the kitchen when he heard his name. He didn't speak English well enough to understand the whole conversation, but he seemed to get the gist of it. Mr. Ennis? He looked at me questioningly. It's all right, Giovanni. I tried to smile, but it didn't come out well. Go back to the kitchen. We'll be done soon. When the chef was out the door, I turned to Maverick. You can't just throw people out on the street like that. Some of them have been working here longer than you've been alive. I can. Maverick smiled, and that smile didn't bode well. And you know why? Because it's my restaurant now. You signed the papers yourself. At that moment, I realized that all my fears had come true. Maverick was never about tradition or caring about people. He saw the restaurant only as a source of income, an object for experimenting with his innovative ideas. Garland coughed, feeling the tension building. I think I'll be going now, he said, gathering his briefcase. Ennis, Maverick, congratulations on closing the deal. I'll walk you out, I said, getting up. We walked outside, and Garland asked quietly, Are you all right? I will be, I answered dryly, but I think I'm going to need a plan B soon. Garland nodded understandingly. Call me if you need help. By the time I got back to the restaurant, Maverick was actively discussing something with the designers, showing them pictures on his phone. Radley was standing off to the side, his face a look of ill-concealed disgust. Maverick, I walked over to my son, we need to talk. Not now, Dad. He didn't even turn to me. I have a meeting with the designers, then with a potential chef, then with the marketing people. Why don't you come by sometime during the week? This is my restaurant. I raised my voice, unable to contain myself. I built it from the ground up, put my heart and soul into it for 50 years. Now Maverick turned around, irritation on his face. Was yours, he emphasized the word was, and now it's mine, and I'm going to do with it as I see fit. You're going to destroy everything I've built. I could feel my voice shaking. You'll drive out the people who were like family to me, change the place I loved beyond recognition. Business is no place for sentimentality, Maverick said. You've always been too soft, too attached to the past. That's why the restaurant never made as much profit as it could have. It's not just about profits. It's about the people, the tradition, the quality. Maverick crossed his arms over his chest and looked at me with undisguised superiority. That's your problem, Dad. You never understood business. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. He turned back to the designers, blatantly ignoring me. I stood there, not knowing what to say or do. Never before had I felt so humiliated, so unwanted. At that moment, several of the restaurant's employees came into the hall. Giovanni, Maria, our hostess who had worked with us for 15 years, and Pablo, the hall manager. They looked at us with bewilderment and concern. "What's going on, Mr. Ennis?" Maria asked. "These people are talking about some kind of change." Maverick turned sharply toward them. "From today, I am the owner of the restaurant," he announced. "And yes, there will be major changes. All employees will be compensated according to labor laws, but your services will no longer be required." "What?" Giovanni stepped forward. "But I've worked here for 18 years. Unfortunately, a new concept requires new staff," Maverick said in the tone of a weather report, impersonal and indifferent. I looked at the faces of people I'd worked with for years and saw shock, bewilderment, and pain in their eyes, all because of my decision to turn the restaurant over to my son. "Maverick, you can't do this," I grabbed his arm. "It's not right." "I can," he shook my hand off. "And I will. Now, if you don't mind, I have work to do, and there's nothing more for you to do here." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. "You're a nuisance, Dad." Maverick said it like he was explaining the obvious to a small child. "Your constant presence will remind the staff of the old ways. I'd rather you didn't come here anymore." I looked at my son and didn't recognize him. Once upon a time, he was a boy who looked up to me with admiration, who wanted to be like me. What happened to that boy? "Are you kicking me out?" I asked it so quietly that he seemed to have trouble hearing. "Don't be so dramatic," Maverick rolled his eyes. "Just find something else to do. Do some gardening or whatever it is retirees do." Radley stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You shallow, ungrateful—" "Don't, Radley," I gestured him away. "He's right. It's his restaurant now." I slowly looked around the room, saying goodbye to every corner, every object. Then I looked at the employees who stood there, unsure of what to do. "I'm sorry," I told them. I hoped it would be different." Then I turned to Maverick, who had already gone back to talking to the designers as if I didn't exist. "Maverick," I called out to him. He turned around with visible irritation. "What else?" I pulled an envelope from my inside pocket and placed it on the table. "This is for you. Open it when I'm gone." "What is it?" He looked at the envelope suspiciously. "You'll see," I answered, and headed for the exit. At the door, I turned around one last time. "You know, Maverick, your mother was proud of this place. She put as much love into it as I did. Too bad she didn't live to see what you'd turn it into." With those words, I walked out of the restaurant, feeling a strange mixture of bitterness and relief. Radley followed me out. "Are you okay?" he asked when we'd gone a few steps away. "No," I answered honestly, "but I will be." We got into Radley's car, and he turned on the ignition. I didn't look back, but with every meter of distance between me and the restaurant, I felt something inside me break, like the last thread that connected me to the past. "What was in the envelope?" Radley asked as we pulled onto the main street. "A copy of the preliminary agreement with Thackeray Snow for the sale of the land under the restaurant," I answered, "and a note saying that by the time he read it, I'd be on my way to Snow's to sign the final contract." Radley whistled. "And you're really going to do that?" "Yes," I nodded, feeling the determination crowd out the pain. "Take me to Snow's office." Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Maverick finally turned his attention to the envelope. He opened it with irritation, thinking it was some sentimental notes from his father, or perhaps old recipes he wasn't going to use anyway. But when he saw the contents, his face changed, first bewilderment, then shock, and finally horror. He read the agreement twice, unable to believe his eyes, then grabbed the note. "By the time you read this, I'll already be signing the final contract for the sale of Thackeray Snow's land. You got the walls and equipment, but not the land. In a month, this place will be a construction site. Business is business, son." Maverick turned pale and slumped in his chair, unable to believe what had happened. Thackeray Snow's office was located in a modern glass building in Lakewood's business district. Radley parked the car in the underground parking garage, and we took the elevator to the 23rd floor. I was silent the whole way up, lost in my own thoughts. My heart was racing, but my resolve never left me. Maverick's words rang in my ears. Business is business. Snow's secretary, a young woman with perfect hair, said at first that Mr. Snow was busy and only took appointments. But as soon as I mentioned the tentative agreement to purchase the land under the Bella Vita restaurant, she immediately changed her tone and ushered us into a spacious office with a panoramic view of the city. Thackeray Snow rose from his desk when he saw us. His face showed a look of surprise, which was quickly replaced by a businesslike smile. "Mr. Larkin, what a pleasant surprise. I didn't expect to see you so soon." "Hello, Mr. Snow." I shook his outstretched hand. "I hope your offer to buy the land under my restaurant is still on the table." Snow's eyes lit up like a predator's on the prowl. Sure, have a seat." He pointed to the leather chairs at his table. "Something to drink? Coffee? Whiskey?" "Nothing, thanks." I sat down with my hands in my lap. "I'm here on business." "Whatever you say." Snow took his seat at the table and looked at me carefully. "So what's changed? As I recall, you were adamantly opposed to the sale." "Circumstances have changed," I answered dryly. "I have a copy of the preliminary agreement we signed last week. I'm ready to move on to the final agreement." Snow leaned back in his chair, a smug smile on his face. "May I ask what exactly changed your mind?" "No, you may not," interjected Radley, standing behind my chair. "That's Mr. Larkin's private business." Snow shifted his gaze to my friend, and his smile became strained. Sure, I understand." He looked at me again. "Well, let's get down to business. The amount remains the same, $2 million for the land under the restaurant Bella Vita. The building and equipment are not included in the deal, as we agreed." "Yes," I nodded. "But I have two conditions." Snow tensed slightly. "What are they?" "First, the money must be transferred to my account today by the end of the day." "That can be arranged," Snow nodded. "And the second?" "Two, you don't start any construction work for a month." Snow thought, tapping his fingers on the table. "A month's delay. That's going to cause some difficulties with the contractors, but I think we can negotiate if we can get the price down to $1,800,000. $2 million, I said firmly. "And a month's grace period. That's my final offer." Snow studied me for a few seconds, as if trying to figure out if I was bluffing or not. Then he smiled and held out his hand. "It's a deal, Mr. Larkin. I'll have the lawyers prepare all the necessary documents immediately." An hour later, all the papers were ready. I signed the contract for the sale of the land, as well as an additional agreement to delay the start of construction work for a month. Snow personally called the bank and ordered the money transferred to my account. "It's a pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Larkin," Snow said, shaking my hand in farewell. "I'm sorry you had to leave the family business, but I'm sure the shopping center we'll build on this site will be the pride of Lakewood." I didn't say anything, just nodded and left the office. In the elevator, Radley put his hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" "No," I answered honestly. "But I will be." We walked out of the building, and I took a deep breath of the fall air. A strange feeling of desolation and release came over me at the same time. I had just sold the land on which stood the restaurant that had been the meaning of my life for almost 50 years, and I'd done it to spite my own son. "What now?" Radley asked as we got into the car. "Now we go to your place," I answered. "If your offer to stay with you for a while still stands." "Sure." Radley started the engine. "The guest room is always ready for you." On the way to Radley's house, my phone started ringing off the hook. Maverick, Odella, even Victoria, Maverick's wife, were all trying to reach me. I turned my phone off. Wasn't ready to talk to them right now. Radley's house, a small but cozy one-story cottage on the outskirts of Lakewood, greeted us with silence and the smell of the coffee he'd brewed in the morning. Radley ushered me into the guest room where I'd been before, but never for long. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, opening the curtains. "I'll fix something to eat." When he came out, I sat on the bed and, for the first time all day, let myself really feel everything that had happened. A wave of emotions washed over me: anger, pain, disappointment, bitterness, betrayal. I covered my face with my hands and cried for the first time in years, quietly, without sobbing, just letting the tears flow. In the evening, the doorbell rang. Radley went to open it and I tensed, preparing myself for an unpleasant conversation. But it wasn't Odella or Maverick, it was Cassidy, my granddaughter, standing on the doorstep with a small travel bag in her hands. "Grandpa!" She rushed to me as soon as she saw me. "I was so worried. Father is frantic. Everyone is looking for you." I hugged her, feeling the tension release a little. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't hard," she smiled slightly. "Where else could you have gone?" Radley offered tea and we sat down at the kitchen table. Cassidy looked worried, but she kept her cool. "Tell me what's going on at home," I asked. She took a deep breath. "It's chaos. Dad came home in a rage, screaming that you'd tricked him, betrayed him, ruined all his plans. Mom tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. Then he called Aunt Odell and she flew in from Boston. They locked themselves in an office with some lawyer and discussed whether they could contest the sale of the land." "You can't," I said firmly. "It was done according to the law." "That's what I thought." Cassidy nodded. "Anyway, they decided they needed to talk to you, to get you to cancel the deal. Dad even suggested—" she stammered. "Suggested what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "To declare you incompetent," Cassidy said quietly, her eyes downcast. "That you didn't know what you were doing when you sold the land." Radley snorted loudly. "Incapacity? Has Maverick gone completely insane?" "That won't work," I shook my head. "Garland Myers, my lawyer, had it covered. Before I signed the contract, I had an independent medical examination to confirm that I was of sound mind and sound judgment." Cassidy looked at me in surprise. "You planned everything in advance?" "I was hoping I wouldn't have to resort to that plan," I sighed. "But I guess I knew my son too well. No sooner had we finished our tea than we heard the squeal of brakes outside. A minute later there was a loud knock on the door. Radley went to open it, and Cassidy and I stayed in the kitchen. Maverick burst into the house like a hurricane, followed by Odella in heels and a business suit, as if she'd come for an important meeting. "There you are!" Maverick pointed his finger at me, his face red with anger. "How could you do this?" "Good evening, Maverick, Odella," I greeted them calmly. "Would you like to sit down?" "Don't play games!" Maverick slammed his fist on the table. "You sold the land under the restaurant. You knew I was planning a major renovation, and you ruined it on purpose." "I sold what belonged to me," I replied, keeping my composure. "The land was never part of our agreement to give up the restaurant." "That's despicable," Odella intervened. "You should have told me. Like you told me you were filing for divorce from your third husband," I parried. "Or how Maverick told me he was planning to completely change the concept of the restaurant and lay off all the employees." Odella averted her gaze as Maverick continued to simmer with rage. "You have to cancel the deal," he demanded. "Otherwise I'm going to sue you." "On what grounds?" I asked calmly. "Everything was done according to the law. The land was my property and I had every right to sell it." You were out of your mind." Maverick grasped at straws. "You're an old man. You have problems with mental clarity. We'll prove you didn't know what you were doing." I smiled, but that smile didn't touch my eyes. "No way, son. I was medically cleared before the deal, fully competent as documented." Maverick froze, realizing that I had foreseen this move as well. Why? He asked after a pause, and for the first time there was something akin to confusion in his voice. Why did you do it? Because you gave me no choice, I answered quietly. You kicked me out of the restaurant that was my life. You were going to destroy everything I'd spent 50 years building. You didn't treat me like a father. You treated me like a nuisance. This is business, Maverick exclaimed. It's nothing personal. The restaurant has always been more than just business to me. I looked him straight in the eye. But you're right. It is a business. And in business, everyone protects their interests as best they can. 3 days had passed since our stormy meeting with Maverick and Odella. I'd temporarily settled into the guest room of the Radley house, trying to get used to the new rhythm of life without the restaurant, without the usual worries and responsibilities. Cassidy went back to her own place, though she called every day, asking how I was feeling. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke up to the ringing of my cell phone. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? I answered, still sleepy. Mr. Larkin? Ennis Larkin? Said a man's voice with an official tone. Yes, that's me. My name is Dwight Arnold, and I'm the attorney for your son, Maverick Larkin. We would like to meet with you today to discuss the situation with the Bella Vita restaurant. I sighed heavily. So Maverick had decided to go the legal route. Okay, I answered after a short pause. Where and when? In my office, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll text you the address. I won't be alone, I warned. My attorney, Garland Myers, will be with me. Of course. Arnold sounded a little disappointed. See you later, Mr. Larkin. I called Garland and told him about the call. He agreed to meet me in Arnold's office. Don't worry, Ennis, Garland reassured me. All the paperwork is perfect. They're just trying to intimidate you. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Garland and I entered Dwight Arnold's office, a small but luxuriously furnished space in one of Lakewood's business centers. A receptionist met us in the reception area and ushered us into the conference room, where Maverick, Odella, and Arnold himself, a young man with a predatory look and an overpriced tie, were waiting. Good afternoon, Mr. Larkin. Arnold rose, extending his hand to me. Thank you for agreeing to meet me. Maverick and Odella sat next to me and didn't even say hello. I nodded and sat down across from them, Garland next to me. Now, Arnold began, laying out the papers in front of him. We're here to discuss a very unpleasant situation that has arisen as a result of the sale of the land under the Bella Vita restaurant to Thackeray Snow. What kind of situation do you mean? Garland asked, straightening up in his chair. As far as I know, Mr. Ennis Larkin had every right to dispose of the land he owned as he saw fit. Technically, yes, Arnold smiled slightly. But there are certain circumstances that might call the legality of this transaction into question. Such as? Garland raised an eyebrow. For example, Mr. Larkin's mental state at the time of signing the contract. Arnold spoke calmly, but his eyes followed my reaction carefully. We have reason to believe that he was acting under severe emotional stress, which could have affected his ability to make informed decisions. I wanted to object, but Garland stopped me with a light touch on my arm. Before you go any further, Mr. Arnold, he said, I'd like to remind you that before signing the contract with Mr. Snow, my client underwent an independent medical evaluation to confirm his full capacity. I have a copy of the report with me. Garland pulled a document from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Arnold took the paper and gave it a quick glance. His smile faded slightly. That's thoughtful, he admitted. But still, Mr. Larkin's actions have caused significant financial damage to his son, who had just invested in the renovation of the restaurant. We believe there was willful sabotage of the family business here. What exactly was the business that was sabotaged? I couldn't take it anymore. The restaurant that I had created and developed for 50 years, that Maverick had gotten for nothing and planned to completely change by firing all the employees, including the chef who had worked with me for 18 years. "Dad, you don't understand," Maverick finally spoke. "The restaurant business is changing. I wanted to make Bella Vita more modern, to attract a new audience. By destroying everything that made it special," I finished. "Don't lie now, Maverick. You never cared about the restaurant as a family legacy. You only saw it as a way to make a quick buck." "Gentlemen, let's not get off topic," Arnold interjected. "We are not here to clarify relations, but to find a solution to the problem." "What solution do you propose?" Garland asked. Arnold leaned back in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. "Mr. Larkin should use his influence to persuade Thackeray Snow to cancel the land purchase agreement. As compensation for possible penalties, we are prepared to offer a certain amount of money." I laughed, unable to contain myself. "Are you serious? You think Snow will refuse the deal, which he dreamed of for 3 years, because of my influence?" "You have to at least try," Odella intervened, for the first time in the entire meeting. "You ruined Maverick's future. You have to fix it." "I did?" I turned to my daughter. "I think Maverick ruined it with his own hands when he kicked me out of the restaurant right after I signed the transfer papers." "You could have just left," Maverick exclaimed. "Why did you have to take revenge?" "I wasn't taking revenge," I replied calmly. "I was protecting what I had built. I'd rather have the restaurant gone than have it turn into something unrecognizable and lose its soul." There was a heavy silence in the room. Arnold coughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Mr. Larkin," he said to me, "think of your family, your son. Do you really want it to end like this?" "How do you think I should have felt, Mr. Arnold?" I looked him straight in the eye. "When my own son kicked me out of the restaurant I built from scratch. When he told me to find another occupation, like retirees do. When he planned to destroy my life's work without even consulting me." Arnold averted his gaze, clearly unprepared for this turn. "It was inconsiderate of your son," he admitted. "But still, perhaps we could find a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" I asked. "The deal is done. The money is transferred. The contract is signed. In 27 days, construction of a shopping center will begin on the site of the restaurant. That's a fact, and there's no changing it." "If Mr. Larkin is not going to take any action to cancel the deal," Garland intervened, "I don't see the point in continuing this meeting." "Wait a minute," Arnold raised his hand. "We have another proposal." He looked at Maverick as if asking for permission, and he nodded. "We are prepared not to sue for a declaration of invalidity if Mr. Larkin agrees to give his son a portion of the money from the sale of the land, say $1 million out of 2. I stared at Arnold, not believing my ears. Then I looked at Maverick and Odell. They looked at me as if the offer was the height of generosity on their part. "You want me to give Maverick half the money from the land sale?" I asked. "After he kicked me out of the restaurant? After he planned to destroy everything I'd built?" "That's fair," Odella said. "After all, it's a family business." "Family?" I shook my head. "When have you ever been interested in family business? When was the last time you, Odella, helped out in a restaurant? Maybe when you were 16 and worked as a hostess one summer. Or when you, Maverick, went there once a month to eat on the house." "That's not fair," Maverick protested. "We have our own lives, our own careers." "Exactly," I raised my voice. "You have your life, I have mine, and my restaurant was part of my life, not yours. You never cared about it, never appreciated what I had created. To you, it was always just a source of money that you planned to get when I died." "Daddy, we didn't," Odella started, but I interrupted her. "Don't, Odell. We all know the truth. When I got sick 3 years ago and went into the hospital with a heart attack, which one of you was there for me? Who helped run the restaurant while I was recovering? Radley, my friend, and Cassidy, my granddaughter, not you." Maverick and Odella exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to say. When your mother died, I continued, feeling the pain in my chest mingle with anger, who among you stayed with me for even a week? Who helped me through that grief? No one. Odella flew back to Boston the day after the funeral because she had an important meeting. Maverick stopped by once a week for an hour, and that was only because his wife insisted. I stopped, trying to calm my breathing. Garland put his hand on my shoulder, silently supporting me. You know what the saddest part is? I continued in a quieter voice. I still loved you, no matter what. And when I decided to give the restaurant to Maverick, I really hoped it would make a difference, that he would see the value in what I had created and keep it. The day after the meeting with the lawyer, Cassidy arrived secretly, without her father's knowledge. She looked upset but determined. Grandpa, I'm so sorry they're doing this to you, she said, hugging me. It's not fair. It's okay, honey, I stroked her head. I'm used to their attitude by now. Dad's furious, Cassidy continued, sitting down next to me on the couch. He can't believe you didn't agree to give him the money. He says you betrayed the family. I grinned bitterly. Your father has an interesting concept of betrayal. He wasn't always like that, was he? Cassidy looked at me hopefully. I remember him telling me stories as a child about helping you at the restaurant, learning to cook. He said those were the best times of his life. Yes, there was a time, I sighed, remembering. Your father loved the restaurant when he was a kid. Always said he'd be a better chef than me when he grew up. But then, something changed. Maybe it was his wife's influence, your mother. She always thought the restaurant business was something unworthy of their status. I know, Cassidy nodded. Mom never hid her attitude toward the restaurant. She always said it was a waste of time and resources. We were silent for a moment, each of us thinking about something else. Grandpa, Cassidy said suddenly, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always be on your side. Thank you, sweetheart. I squeezed her hand. It means more to me than you can imagine. Cassidy started sneaking over to my place almost every day. We cooked together, reminisced about old times, discussed the books she read to the kids at the library. These meetings became bright spots in my new, strange life without a restaurant. A week after the meeting with the lawyer, Maverick made another attempt. He showed up at the Radley house alone, without Odella and without the lawyer. He looked tired and a little confused. Daddy, we need to talk, he said when I opened the door. I let him in and we sat down in the living room. Radley had tactfully retired to the kitchen, leaving us alone. I'm listening, I said, crossing my arms over my chest. Maverick took a deep breath. I've started selling off the restaurant equipment, he said, trying to salvage something. But it's not enough. I took out a renovation loan and now I can't pay it back. I was waiting for the rest of the story. I'm asking you to help. Maverick stared at the floor, clearly struggling to get the words out. Not for me, for Victoria and the kids. We could lose the house. I stared at my son, trying to see if he was sincere or just another manipulation. Why should I help you, Maverick? I asked bluntly. After everything you've done? Because you're my father. He finally looked up at me. And because, despite everything, I know you love your grandchildren. He was right. I loved my grandchildren, even the ones who, like my parents, rarely visited me. How many do you need? I asked after a long pause. 500,000, Maverick answered. That will cover the loan and help us get back on our feet. I shook my head. 300,000, I said, and that's my final word. Maverick looked like he wanted to haggle, but then he just nodded. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me, I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I'm not doing this for you, but for your children. And Maverick, don't expect anything more from me. He nodded and walked away without another word. I watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. Maybe that was the last time I would ever see my son. That evening I told Radley all about it. "Are you sure you did the right thing?" he asked, looking at me with concern. "After everything he'd done?" "No, I'm not sure," I answered honestly. "But he's still my son, and I don't want my grandchildren to suffer for his mistakes." Radley nodded understandingly and didn't ask any more questions. The next day, Cassidy arrived. She already knew about her father's visit. "Is it true you gave him money?" she asked me as soon as we were alone. "Yes," I nodded. 300,000. Don't ask me why. I don't fully understand it myself. "I know why," Cassidy smiled. "Because you're better than him. Better than all of them." I didn't know what to say to that. I just hugged my granddaughter, grateful for her support and understanding. That night, we had a long talk about the future, about what I would do when all this was over, about her plans and dreams. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that despite all the losses, I still had something precious, the love of my granddaughter and the opportunity to start over. The last month before the restaurant was demolished was a blur. I avoided showing up downtown, not wanting to see Maverick selling off the equipment and furniture from Bella Vita. Radley told me that people in town were talking about how the much-loved restaurant would soon be replaced by another faceless mall. Some even organized a petition against the demolition, but it was useless. All the legal formalities had been complied with, and Thackeray Snow was not going to give up his plans. I spent my days quietly alone, contemplating the future. I had nearly $2 million at my disposal, of which I had given 300,000 to Maverick. The remaining sum was more than I had ever had before, and opened before me opportunities I could only dream of before. One morning, sitting on the veranda of the Radley house with a cup of coffee, I suddenly remembered a conversation I'd had with Eleanor a long time ago. We had just opened a restaurant then, working 16 hours a day, barely making ends meet, but happy. One night when we closed the restaurant and it was just the two of us, she asked, "Ennis, if we suddenly had a lot of money, what would you do?" "I would expand the restaurant, of course," I answered without thinking. "I would buy new equipment, hire more staff." Eleanor laughed and shook her head. "You never think about yourself," she said. "And I'd like to travel, to see Italy, where my grandparents are from, to visit France, to taste real French food, to visit Greece, to bask on its white beaches." I smiled, remembering the dreamy look on her face. "We'll definitely go," I promised then. "When the restaurant gets back on its feet, when the kids are older, we'd see the world, but we never went. There were always more important things to do, more urgent expenses. And then it was too late. Eleanor got sick and we lost the opportunity to realize this dream together." Sitting on the veranda and looking up at the morning sky, I suddenly realized what I wanted to do. I want to travel, to see all the places Eleanor had dreamed of, to do something we'd been putting off all our lives for later. That same day, I called Garland and asked him to meet me. He arrived at the Radley house in the late afternoon, and we sat on the same veranda where I'd had my epiphany that morning. "I want to make a will," I said without preamble. Garland raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Are you ill, Ennis?" he asked anxiously. "No," I smiled. "On the contrary, I'm full of energy and plans, but I want everything to be in order before I go traveling." "A journey?" Garland looked even more surprised now. "Yes," I nodded. I had decided to fulfill a long-time dream of mine and Eleanor's, to see the world while I still had the chance. Garland nodded slowly, considering my words. "It's unexpected," he said at last, "but it's probably the right thing to do. If anyone deserves a vacation and new experiences, it's you, Ennis." We discussed the details of the will. I decided to leave the house to Odell as I had originally planned. Half of the money I've left to Cassidy and the other half to charity, to a fund I've decided to set up for young chefs. "And Maverick?" Garland asked cautiously. "He's already gotten his share," I answered. $300,000 is more than enough. Garland nodded without arguing. He knew the whole story and seemed to think my decision was fair. "Well, I'll get the paperwork ready," he said, standing up. "When do you plan to travel?" "As soon as the restaurant is demolished," I answered. "I want to close this chapter before I begin another." After Garland left, I told Radley about my plans. He listened carefully and then suddenly said, "I'll go with you." "What?" I looked at my friend in surprise. "I'll go with you," he repeated. "If you don't mind the company, of course." "But your home, your life here." "Ennis," Radley smiled. "I'm 66 years old. I'm a widower. My children live in other cities and visit me once a year at Christmas. What's keeping me here? Besides," he winked, "I've always wanted to see Italian vineyards." I laughed, feeling my heart fill with joy. The thought of Radley and I traveling together made it all the more appealing. "Then it's settled," I said, holding out my hand. "We're going together." Radley shook my hand and we both smiled, like boys on an adventure. The next day I called Cassidy and asked her to come over. I wanted to tell her my plans in person, not over the phone. When she arrived, we sat down in the living room and I announced without preamble, "I've decided to travel, Cassidy, to see the world while I still can." She looked at me for a few seconds, then smiled broadly. "That's wonderful, Grandpa," she exclaimed. "You deserve it more than anyone else." "Radley's coming with me," I added. We had already started planning the itinerary. Italy first, then France, Greece. "I'm so happy for you." Cassidy took my hands in hers. "But I'm gonna miss you." "Me too, sweetheart," I squeezed her hands. "But we'll keep in touch. And who knows, maybe you can fly down to visit us for the vacations." Her eyes lit up. "Really? Would you like that?" "Of course," I smiled. "You're the only one in the whole family I really want to share this experience with." We talked all evening. I told her about the will, about how half of the money left would be hers. Cassidy was shocked. "But Grandpa, that's a huge amount of money, almost $1 million. "You're the only one who deserves it," I said simply. The only one who was always there for me, who truly appreciated what I had created. She hugged me, and I felt her tears on my cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. "But know that I don't want your money. I want you alive and happy." "I know, sweetheart," I stroked her head. "That's why you're going to get it." The day of the restaurant demolition, I decided to face it head on. Despite Radley's entreaties not to go there, I insisted on going. I wanted to be there to say goodbye to the place that had been the center of my life for almost 50 years. We arrived early in the morning when the construction equipment was just starting to pull up. To my surprise, a small crowd had gathered around the restaurant, Lakewood residents who had been our customers for years. They brought placards protesting the demolition. Some were even crying. When they saw me, there was a round of applause. People came up, shook my hand, thanked me for years of great food and hospitality. Many asked if I had any plans to open a new restaurant somewhere else. I was touched by their support, but firmly replied that Bella Vita was one of a kind and could not be repeated. It was time for something new. Among the crowd, I noticed Giovanni, our chef, and other former employees. They stood together, holding hands, and the same mixture of sadness and gratitude was written on their faces that I felt myself. Thackeray Snow was there too, surrounded by workers and engineers. When he saw me, he came over and held out his hand. "Mr. Larkin," he said with a respect I had not noticed in him before, "I want you to know that we're going to put a plaque in the new mall honoring Bella Vita. This place will remember its history." I shook his hand, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Snow," I said. "This is unexpected." "I'm not a monster, Mr. Larkin," he smiled slightly. "Just a businessman. And I respect what you've created here." With those words, he turned back to his men, and soon the demolition process began. I stood and watched as the huge excavator made the first impact on the wall as bricks and plaster crumbled away, exposing the insides of a building I knew like the back of my hand. It was painful, but at the same time strangely liberating, as if, with each blow of the backhoe, the weight of the past was lifted off my shoulders. Radley stood beside me, clutching my shoulder tightly in silent support. We hadn't exchanged a single word, but we understood each other without words. When all that was left of the restaurant was a pile of rubble, I finally turned to leave. And then I saw Maverick and Odella standing apart from the crowd. They were staring at the destruction with a look of shock and bitterness on their faces. I approached them, not knowing what I was going to say, but feeling like I had to say something. "Maverick, Odella." I nodded to them. "Daddy." Odella looked like she was about to cry. "I didn't think it would be so final." "Everything in this world ends sometime," I said calmly. "What matters is what's left behind." "And what is left?" Maverick asked bitterly. "A pile of stones?" "Memories," I answered. "Recipes, stories, people whose lives were part of this place. All of it remains." They were silent, staring at the ruins of the restaurant. I sighed and pulled 2 envelopes out of my pocket. "These are for you," I said, holding one out to each of them. "Open it when you're ready." With those words, I turned and walked away without looking back. Radley followed me, and we walked in silence to his house. The envelopes contained the same message. "I've given you all I can. Now it's my turn to live for myself." And a copy of my travel itinerary. No exact dates or addresses, just a list of countries and cities I planned to visit. 2 days after the demolition of the restaurant, Radley and I were ready to leave. All of our belongings were packed, tickets bought, hotels booked. Our first stop was to be Rome, then Florence, Venice, and on through Europe. No rush, no definite return date. On the eve of departure, Cassidy came to see me to say goodbye. She brought a small gift, a photo album she had put together herself, with pictures of the restaurant, the family, Eleanor and me over the years. "So you don't forget where you come from," she said, handing me the album. I was touched to the core. "Thank you, honey," I said, hugging her. "This is the best gift ever." We talked for a long time that night. I told her about my plans, that I would keep a travel journal and send her pictures from each city. She promised to visit us in Italy in the summer while we were on vacation. When it was time to say goodbye, Cassidy gave me a big hug. "I love you, Grandpa," she said. "Enjoy every moment." "I love you too, Cassidy," I replied, feeling tears come to my eyes. "More than you can imagine." After she left, I sat on the veranda, leafing through the album she had given me. The photos told the story of my life, from a young, enthusiastic guy opening his first restaurant to a gray-haired old man passing the business on to his son. In between is a lifetime of labor, love, joy, and sorrow. On the last page, Cassidy left a note. "Every ending is the beginning of something new. Your story doesn't end here, Grandpa. It's just beginning." I smiled as I closed the album. She was right. My story didn't end with the closing of the restaurant or the severing of my relationship with my children. It continued, and there were many more pages to fill. In the morning, Radley and I got into the cab that was to take us to the airport. The driver loaded our suitcases, and we took one last look back at the house that had been our refuge for the past few weeks. "Ready?" Radley asked, looking at me with a smile. "More than ever," I answered, feeling a strange excitement, almost like when I was young, when everything seemed possible and the future seemed endless. On the way to the airport, my phone rang. It was Maverick. I hesitated whether to answer it or not, but finally decided to answer it. "Yeah?" "Dad," Maverick's voice sounded strange, like he didn't know what to say. "Yeah, I just wanted to wish you a safe journey." I remained silent, surprised by this unexpected display of, what, caring? Remorse? "Thank you, Maverick," I finally answered. "And also," he hesitated. I was going to say that Odella and I decided not to file any lawsuits. We realized it was futile and probably unfair. That was more than I expected to hear. I appreciate that, I said. Good luck, Dad, Maverick said quietly and hung up. I looked at the phone, wondering if this was the beginning of reconciliation or just an admission of defeat. But then I decided it didn't matter anymore. I'd made my choice and they'd made theirs. Now each of us would go our separate ways. At the airport, we checked in and headed to the departure area. Standing in line to board, I suddenly felt a strange sense of relief, as if the weight I'd been carrying all these years had finally lifted from my shoulders. "What's on your mind?" Radley asked, noticing my pensive expression. "Freedom," I answered, "and how sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." Radley nodded understandingly. "Eleanor would be proud of you," he said quietly. I smiled, imagining her beside us as excited and full of anticipation as I was. "Yes," I agreed. "I think she'd approve." When our flight was announced, we got up and headed for the gate. I didn't look back. Everything I needed to see was ahead of me. New horizons, new experiences, a new life. The airplane took off, taking me away from the past to the future I had chosen for myself. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.